uh, and we'll begin.
Okay. Yes, let me just make the let me make this a little more level. Okay.
Sure.
Is that a better view?
That looks fine to me.
Good.
All right. And it's my pleasure to be talking to Brian Trenchard-Smith here, who is located in Oregon in USA. You can see the wonderful background there. And of course, Brian is such an important filmmaker, producer, writer, director of such films, of course, as Man from Hong Kong, Death Cheaters, BMX Bandits, Turkey Shoot, Dead End Drive-In, Stunt Rock, Sahara, Happy Face Murders. What a terrific array of films. Brian, it's so good to talk to you.
Well, it's very good to talk to you too, Peter. Thank you for, wow, that's, you got through half of them, or of the titles, so that's good. I have 41 crimes against cinema to my credit, and 43 episodes of television, and I've made over 100 trailers for theatrically released films, and made a few short films, probably the most significant of which was one called Hospitals Don't Burn Down. Right. Somewhat misleading. It was a fire safety film that I was commissioned to make, and I sort of made it into a bit of a horror disaster movie. But it was very effective as a fire safety film, and was used for maybe 30 years before it finally ran out of date. But it was Australia's highest selling industrial film for a generation. We made it in Australia for $80,000. Wow. But it depicts what happens if fire cuts a hospital, springing up in the basement, and cuts the hospital in half on the 6th floor. And it was full of lessons about bad housekeeping, proper procedures, all the things that hospital staff must think about, and what would happen, of course, if a fire breaks out, and what procedures they should observe. So anyway, it's a small credit. It's a 24-minute film, won a few short film awards, but it is actually a film I'm quite proud of, because it had, it had social worth, let's say. It was a sort of slightly, sort of an intense, docudrama depiction of what might happen if a hospital caught fire. While we were making it, we christened it the Towering Infirmary. Anyway, so a digression. Anyway, carry on.
Okay. All of that and more is in your terrific book, Adventures in the B-Movie Trade. And I really enjoyed reading it. It took me a while, but it's 580 pages worth or whatever. But it's such a good read. Tell me about your process, because you must have had extensive diaries, journals, etc., to be able to recall so much detail in your book.
Yes. Well, I run 4 companies until I wound them all up about 5 years ago, since 1972. And naturally, I had records of all my correspondence, and I had diaries, and I had memory to a degree, though it's beginning to fail me now, of course. But I was able to provide the facts and the interesting details on production challenges, political battles, etc., on all the films that I have made. I have covered them all, and of course some of my trailer making career as well, which I conducted in England for 2 years. Excuse me, I've got to drink this.
Of course.
This is water. I also, but one of the things that does afflict people in Oregon till they get used to it, allergies from the pollen. So if I'm a little snuffly, a bit of a phlegm factory, in fact, it is something that happens to people who move to Oregon, and then 5 years later they get afflicted by the the allergies, and then after 5 years, their system adapts. And I know this because my son preceded me here. 5 years later, he got terrible allergies, and now it's not so much. So anyway, little tourist detail for your British listeners if they can cross the pond to Oregon, because I'm living in Middle Earth actually. So it feels very Tolkien-esque, surrounded by 150-foot Douglas firs and deer that come to my door and beg for apples, which I give them because who can resist Bambi?
I can see a film out of that.
Yes. Mr. Disney made quite a good one in the early 1940s.
Of course.
I must remember which century I'm living in now. In fact, I wrote about it. I did a piece called in Trailers from Hell, which is a website I contribute to, and I've done about 95 of them. And one of mine was on Bambi, and it will show that Walt Disney was a stealth environmentalist who had some serious things about living with nature and preserving the environment. He was, ahead of his time, even though, you considered maybe the making of money was primary in his focus, but actually he had causes. Of course, he was also rather right-wing, and I believe somewhat anti-Semitic. But he had his good side, and in his good side was a dedication to getting the message out about the environment. Anyway, just another digression for you.
Okay. Now, back to your remarkable book, Adventures in the B-Movie Trade. You wrote it before the pandemic hit in 2020. But what is so interesting is the recall that you have of the conversations with various filmmakers or with producers, in particular producers, and others in trying to get your films made. And it's so important to note the relationships that you needed to develop between various producers and funding bodies and so on. That in itself is such a strategy that you've had to adopt in order to get your great films made, like Man from Hong Kong and Dead End Drive-In and so on.
Well, yes. I mean, film is the relationship business, and it's a collaborative medium. Of course, we directors think we are auteurs, and it all we're the source of the genius, but actually we really need a lot of very skilled collaborators to make our work look good. So I'm certainly someone, I like to lead, but then I like to surround myself with people, many of whom I hope are smarter than I, who can make my ideas work better. So the ability to collaborate with people and enthuse them with your vision for what should happen, be it you enthuse financiers to think you can get your money back out of this, and here's why. So you have to be able to show that your product is going to be commercially viable or have a good chance. As most films, if in truth, lose money for investors, though if those investors are big media giants, they simply add them to their library and they will pay for themselves in the end, unless they've spent 200 million on them, like the Lone Ranger, and then it's a long time getting back to break even. But anyway, the corpses, Hollywood corpses are box office corpses are littered everywhere, but it's important to just develop good relationships with all your collaborators and also with the stakeholders in the project that you propose. Luckily, pardon me, we're on the flight path to a light plane landing field, but it will go away. I mean, it just, I think it is a skill that I've had and been able to communicate to people, communicate my ideas and a path forward. And I'm grateful that I got some of my father's RAF discipline, and I got and a sense of organization. And he was retired as a wing commander, and my mother's innate sense of drama, because she started out to be an actress, but then married my father, and World War II intervened, and well, that was that. But I got gifts from both parents that worked well, most particularly when I came to Australia. My father's Australian, my mother's Irish English. I could see a very lengthy progress towards filmmaking. When I was 18 to 20, I got a couple of jobs in the business, but not much. And I just thought, I'm going to visit the land of my father, where there is no film industry, but there are some television stations, and perhaps there will be a film industry, as I learned there was one once in Australia, and there could be again. And I arrived at the right time. Ripeness is all, as a better writer than I once put it. So arriving in '66, and then by 1970, already the Australian Film Development Corporation and Barry McKenzie was underway, and Alvin Purple was being thought about, and so forth. So Stone, was in the works. So it was easy to, that there was a tide, and I was lucky to be washed along with that tide. Because if I'd stayed in England, maybe, I was in the cutting room area, and maybe I could have made top editor by my early 30s, and somehow got hold of a script or written a script that was, found favor, and been given a shot at directing by my mid 30s. But when you're 19, you're a bit impatient. And for some reason, I thought Australia would be a fast route. A country without a film industry would be a fast route to making a film, and it proved to be exactly the case. So 10 years later, I had made Man from Hong Kong. So there you go. It's funny how things turn out. But I'm glad.
And it's such an intriguing film. And the story behind The Man from Hong Kong, or Dragonflies, I think was another title for it, and also the whole issue of the Jigsaw song Sky High, and how that was integrated, and finding the right actor to be the lead. I mean, that in itself is such a fascinating story.
Yeah, well, I did conceive it for Bruce Lee, but Bruce, unfortunately died as I was on my way to Hong Kong to meet him.
Yeah.
And I was going to make a documentary about him and use that as a means of putting my 6-page treatment for what was turned out to be The Man from Hong Kong under his nose. But that was not to be. But I did, as a result of the documentary, did develop a relationship with his Chinese producer, Raymond Chow, and out of that were conversations, and then I wrote the script, and they could see it as a good vehicle for their new, the former #1 Asian box office star, Wong Yu, who Jimmy, his English language name, Jimmy Wong Yu, was what they came up with. But he had been a big star with The One-Armed Swordsman, One-Armed Boxer, Beach of the War Gods, whole string of films. He was, now that Bruce was dead, he was ready to be #1 again. And they hoped that this film would give him that English language, visibility be his first English language film. And by partnering him with Australian George Lazenby, former James Bond, they thought that would be, there'd be good chemistry there. But unfortunately, the production was delayed by 6 months due to the heart attack of the CEO of Greater Union Theatres, who was, basically controlling, 1/4 of the investment. So it took a while to get Greater Union's ducks in a row again to ratify the deal that we had made. And we almost lost Raymond Chow, who thought, hey, I've got to do something else. Well, he was doing many things. He was making 12 films a year. But luckily, it came to pass. But the net result of that, in truth, was the film, when completed and hitting the market, landed about 6 months late, 6 months behind the peak of the Kung Fu boom. That was unfortunate. Because after Bruce Lee's death, a huge number of what were called chop socky Kung Fu, cheap, imitations starring Bruce L.I., or and various other attempts to cash in on Bruce's name. They flooded the American market, which meant that our film, initially released as The Dragon Flies, did not, cause a splash, because there were 15 other films released with the word dragon in the title to capitalize on Bruce's Enter the Dragon. So anyway, but that's the luck of the draw. It's it ain't over till it's over. And everyone was convinced that we had a huge box office success, pretending in the US, or what would be a really significant gross for a film that only cost $550,000 all up once we'd paid for the new song, which you mentioned earlier. The film originally had a different opening title song, which actually was called Power. Not that that was the title, because we made it the film under the title, The Man from Hong Kong. But when we showed it to the British distributor exhibitor block, the Rank organization, most particularly, whose theaters would play it, they said, well, we've got this new relationship with Leeds Music, and they have this great band that they wanted to break called Jigsaw, or as we called it in Australia, because there was an Australian Jigsaw, and we called it British Jigsaw. But we've got this, and they have a song that actually might suit you. And if we get Richard Hewson, who did arrangements for the Beatles and for Simon and Garfunkel, if we get him to do the arrangement on the song, and you could have a good title song, and it can run the 4 minutes of the opening titles, and then there could be a two-minute version for Top of the Pops. And sure enough, the 2-minute version hit #1 in the UK and in Australia, and #2 in Japan, and I think certainly in the top 10 in the UK, in the US, after, of course, the film had been released, or pretty much it rose in the charts as Man from Hong Kong left the screens in the US, sadly. But anyway, so I was offered that choice, and I could have stuck with my original title song, but there's a time when you listen to others, and I could see the commercial potential of promoting the film through music, as well as its star value such as it had. So went with that, and it was a wise decision. And Sky High is still playing in elevators across the world, and I think we made a bit of royalty out of it. I think in the end, I think we only got about $20,000, but I'm sure they made a great deal of money out of the song themselves. But yeah, there you go. But it was worth me suddenly getting on a plane, flying to England, working with the band in Abbey Road, by the way, and that studio, and at the last minute, because we were to show it at the Cannes Film Festival, or the market of the Cannes Film Market part, early May, May 10 or something like that, and we were, basically at the beginning of April. So I had to do a quick flight, get the music done, back to Australia, remix it, and then make the new print. So anyway, exciting adventures. Just be prepared to get on a plane if you whenever when it seems a smart move, get on a plane.
Absolutely.
It's harder to do now, of course.
Yeah.
Now you have to spend 2 weeks in a hotel before you can emerge and do your business.
That is very true.
Anyway, so how is Melbourne locked down at the moment? Are you out of lockdown?
We're lockdown light at the moment, where in Melbourne we can travel as far as 25 kilometres outside of Melbourne, but we're not allowed to get into regional areas of Victoria yet. We'll see what happens.
What about the cases? The cases have fallen quickly since the lockdown started.
They have. Yes, there was one announced today. Yes, we'll see how that travels, especially with that more virulent strain that people are worried about, but we'll see. Brian, let's go back talking about other films, and Turkey Shoot is an example of what was coined the Ozploitation, not quite Hollywood documentary, Mark Hartley's film, which is such a terrific doco about the sort of the
great film.
B movies. It is. And Tarantino, of course, was so enamored by Turkey Shoot and by some of your other films. That must have been such an interesting time for you to meet him and to make those films like Turkey Shoot.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, it was. Turkey Shoot it sort of sprang from my id to a degree, sort of black-hearted laugh, politically, themed action horror film, which it was originally intended as 1984 meets The Camp on Blood Island, and they play the most dangerous game, or The Naked Prey, or Run of the Arrow, or The Hunger Games. Choose your derivative. So it was a genre cocktail that I wanted to make. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford the 1984 section of the first 15 pages of the script as written, because it was written for a bigger budget film, and suddenly we found ourselves, about 2.5 weeks before shooting, when not all the money had arrived, and we had to cut the first 15 pages and fudge them in the opening sequence with little flashbacks as to how the principal characters were captured. There they are in a prison van on their way to the prison camp. So we, instead of having elaborate chase sequences in expensive locations with big action, we had to stick to the simple story point. These are distant, they get captured, and here they are at the prison camp, bang. And so to convey 1984, I did it all with newsreel footage of riots and police brutality in these situations. So, and as it turned out, that kind of generic opening proves to be quite prescient today. Anyway, it's two sides to your question. Sure, it was great fun to make it, and then it was reviled by Australian critics. As one actress came out of the the Australian Film Institute, pre-selection awards screening, and she hissed at me, "How could you?" I said it came from my id. But Philip Adams sort of frothed at the mouth a great deal and even started to imagine things that weren't actually in the film. But hey, my skill as the powers of suggestion, I'm obviously I take that as a compliment. Because Linda Stoner was not speared in the Nork. But anyway, take a look at the shot and you'll see. There's a story attached to the shooting of Linda's demise, which wasn't in the original shoot. We did it as a pickup because we really wanted to put a button on what happened to her after, Carmen Duncan had, approached her practically drooling. And we sort of kind of knew bad things were going to happen. But in these kind of movies, you sometimes need to see the body. So we just set up a little place in Lanecote National Park, away from the road, where we could just shoot the body being walked away from by Carmen. And what we didn't realize was a police helicopter was cruising nearby, and looking down, they saw this sort of blood-stained body with a group of people around it, and immediately, called it in and came down, and we had actually finished by the time they got to us, but that required a little bit of explanation. Let's say why there was this woman in a bloodstained jumpsuit, torn and bloodstained. What were we doing with her? Was it some satanic ceremony? Who knows? Anyway, it was one of those little bizarre things that happened during filming, and I'm sure you meet many filmmakers with many a bizarre story. But so that that making the film was full of fun and incident, but it was reviled by critics and was huge in the drive-ins, huge on video. And then I thought, well, that film did not, unfortunately, do me any good. It kind of pegged me as a B-grade exploitation director, barely competent, et cetera, et cetera. You can read all the crits. But then many years later, I was in Hollywood at a premiere that Quentin Tarantino was attending the after party at Morton's. No, Chasen's, that's right. And I was introduced to him and by Mira Sorvino. Mira Sorvino, he was his girlfriend at the time. And I said, well, you don't know me. I'm Brian Trenchard-Smith. Yes, I do. You made Turkey Shoot. I love that film. What about that scene where they beat that girl up on a parade ground? Roger Ward was the guard from hell. What were you thinking, man? That was great. And then he started to quote lines of dialogue verbatim. The mea culpa from the dissident. I am a turkey, the lowest form of animal life on earth. And he particularly liked the camp commandant's, the message from the bad guys, freedom is obedience, obedience is work, work is life, sort of motto for the Trump years, really. So it had, the film has not gone out of date in its way. It's a very colorful, over the top, snipe at, corporate fascism, you might say, where, or authoritarianism was, if authoritarianism rules, then the elite can do anything. Now there are people on both sides of politics, each saying, they're the elite. No, they're the elite. And anyway, but the truth is that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. So we must prevent people from getting absolute power. There'll always be a corrupt system of some kind of quasi-democratic oligarchy, I think, is what we all live in the Western world. And it isn't too bad. It just could be a lot worse if it became authoritarian rule, and you have no way of throwing the buggers out. So anyway, never going to happen in Australia, of course.
Hmm.
No, I don't think it will. No, truly, Australians are too sensible. You know, they have good values, and I've always felt that, and I loved. I don't live in Australia. I'd love to live in both places. But it seems possible that I can only live in Oregon. But I'll come back and make a movie. And love to spend the summer in both places. That would, but who wouldn't? Anyway, so now I don't know whether I really answered your question.
Pretty much,
I was deeply gratified that someone of Quentin's stature would, firstly take the time to talk to someone who was, a very, a minor flash in the pan, if anything, at that time in 1998. And I was just a journeyman director trying to make a living in Hollywood. And because I directed Mira's father, Paul Sorvino, in my previous film, I got invited to this by her. And then I got to meet him, and he, invited me to his house a number of times since. And we've had lunches and dinners occasionally. I'm not, let's say, I'm not a part of the inner circle. I'm sort of right on the outer periphery, but and I don't think I haven't spoken to him for about 18 months now. Not before he had a child, and he was went to Israel, and has kind of distanced himself from the old round of haunts, and I think he's enjoying the pleasures of marriage and fatherhood, and so that's good. I'll hear from him when at some future time. Hopefully he will read my book. I mean, I've let his agent know that it is it's there, and no doubt he will read it, and I will hear from him. But he is one of many people, as I say in the book, that have took the trouble to give me either a pat on the head or a helping hand. My book is full of people who gave me a helping hand. I'm a bit like Blanche Dubois. Survived on the kindness of strangers. But I had quite early in my career, and I got given a sort of very junior executive position at Channel 9 due to someone who thought, this young kid's got something. So, and thanks. And, one thing's led to another. So that is how careers are made, because you serve someone, serve them well, and they come back to you again. And
yes.
That's really just how the film business works.
And speaking of giving a helping hand, your claim to fame also is discovering Nicole Kidman in BMX Bandits.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, it's another fortunate series of coincidences. I mean, there was another girl in mind, and I had worked with her once before when she was 9. Now she was 16. And she had good acting instincts, but her mother said, I don't want you to be in a BMX movie. It's too Westy. There was some class prejudice against, what was, an average Australian kid's pastime, anyway, it was considered Western suburbs, and so I had to quickly look for someone else, and Nicole auditioned. And my producers pointed out that she was taller than the two boys we'd already cast. And, girls shouldn't be taller than boys now, should they really? I mean, not in a patriarchal, don't get me started. But but I said, what's the problem? She's gorgeous. The camera loves her. She's got a good flair for making the dialogue, make sense. And I think she has some comedy timing, and shock of frizzy hair, 5'10" plus. So I had my way, which I was allowed to do. And luckily I had Academy Award winner of the future, John Seal, as my fourth film with him as DP, so I pushed her to the foreground and had the two lads tag along behind, rather than have her as the tag along girl, which was where the script was originally written. And I, pushed the comedy in the show, and she responded very well with that, and she struck a chord with girls and boys, obviously, but girls as a role model in that film. And when the film was over, I did two things. I told the leading actors agent in Australia, in Sydney. There were many in Melbourne as well who were good. June Can. And I said, there are three young people in my movie. When you come to the Australian Film Institute Awards pre-screenings at Film Australia, take a look at them, because you might do something with them. And she took on two. She took on Angelo D'Angelo and Nicole Kidman. And James Lugden, who was Goose and very good as Goose, very nice, dry sense of humor. He subsequently embraced journalism as a better career. And I spoke with him a couple of years ago. Great guy. So she was really up and away, not because I had discovered her so much as she just had, innate talent, and everyone can see a talent and think, I can make use of that. I gave her some publicity by having a dinner with Matt White of the Daily Mirror and her and the three of us. And I told an American producer, Doug Netter, who was going to do season 3 of 5 Mile Creek, and I'd done some episodes of 5 Mile Creek. He said, I'm looking to some young girl to play an Irish waif. And I said, And I had not yet mixed the film. And I said, let me show you my cut. And he cast her in the 3rd season. There was never a 4th, just as well. Would have gotten in the way of other plans that she had, or that the whole industry had for her. She never stopped working, basically, from after BMX Bandits onwards. And I said to Matt White, she will have outstanding roles in every decade of her career, and she'll probably end up in her 80s, like I said, playing sort of feisty Catherine Hepburn grandmothers that'll take no shit from from all around. But yeah, she's a very empathetic actress. She she has a full range of emotions at her control, and she is good with the nuances of dialogue. You look at her in The Hours, you look at her in Lion. There's so many things that she has done where you can really see her skills, and she just had them, and she worked hard at polishing them. So I wish I could have had her in more films, but when they move up, they're going to play with the big boys. I was glad to have her. I offered her. Strangely enough, in Day of the Panther, when I've recast 8 parts when I took over the film 4 days into. And I did put a quick call in and say, please come and play the female lead in this. But she said, no, I can't do those kind of movies anymore. It's not, and she's right. That would have been the wrong thing for her career. So, I said, fine. Anyway, I'm pleased for her, and she seems to be leading a very successful and happy life. And good for her. She deserves it.
Yeah. Great story, and such an interesting origin to her career. I must ask you, but I know I'm running out of time, but Dead End Drive-In, I think, is probably one of your best films, and it's such an interesting story about making that film, and the way it has endured, I think, as a significant part of your filmography.
Yes, I think, again, because it has social and political issues underpinning the fantasy. It is a socio-political allegory of the future. Again, when you have authoritarian rule, so and again, also it was, I won't say reviled, it was either dismissed with faint praise or scorned by critics at the time. Australian critics were then at that point getting on their high horse about the quality of Australian films. I think they were tired of having to go to all these, there were 20 films made in a year, or more actually, 25 films. Anyway, but I am not always the greatest fan of critics, and critics have not always been the greatest fan of mine too. I mean, I remember Andrew McCarthy, an actor I worked with in Escape Clause, and has had an illustrious career. So just remember that critics are eunuchs at the orgy. They can't do it, and they bitch about people who can. So I have now probably enraged every single critic who is watching this podcast,
including me,
including you. Yeah, but I'm not making any, casting no aspersions on your ability to procreate. Anyway.
Look, that's great, but I understand perfectly the notion of critics being very snooty about particular types of films and genre films, and if we look at that Ozploitation era, there were a number of critics who were pretty snooty about those sorts of films, and so I do understand where you're coming from on this.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it in the context of what is it is intended to be. If you are, ideologically opposed to the drive-in movie kind of entertainment, the low-brow, crass, lowest common denominator of taste, and if you feel that is not what cinema is for, and should not be encouraged, or certainly the public sector should not invest in such things. They should invest in high-minded depictions of Australia's noble past. Let's focus on Tasmania, shall we, for a bit? Actually, I think the Nightingale does that quite effectively. I'm writing a piece on the Nightingale right now for Trailers from Hell, and I think it's a very powerful film. Anyway, but sure, there are high-minded films depicting Australia's social problems and Australia's past are valuable and should be made. I mean, Sunday Too Far Away, very important film. Picnic at Hanging Rock, very important film. Devil's Playground, very important. Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, it disturbed me, and I should perhaps see it again. The killing of the baby was just a bit much for me, and maintaining sympathy, therefore, for the central character after that. However, you have to understand what the Indigenous people were suffering at that time, and how the attitudes could well have been formed. And so, and I just don't know whether, I don't know whether it totally built sufficient context for me to accept the atrocities, let's say. But the atrocities were, largely committed against the Indigenous people. I'm probably enraging a whole new sector of your listenership now by pontificating about Australia's past. But you see, actually, Australia isn't to blame for the extermination of the Indigenous in Tasmania. It's the British. It was a British penal colony and run along British colonial cultural lines. So, anyway, another digression. History fascinates me, you see. That's there's a lot to be learned from history. Anyway, so critics, yes. Thank you for being a commendable critic and bothering to have me on your show. you know. But I mean, I love all genres of film. You know, Bergman, you know, great, you know, directors in all countries make great films, and I tended to specialize in broad audience pictures, meat and potatoes films that I really loved as a kid. I think that something that has to be acknowledged by us sort of driven filmmakers is that there's something about us, about what captured our imagination out there in the dark as teenagers, in those, you know, sometimes crowded cinemas, sometimes empty cinemas. And we loved the films that excited us as a child in whatever genre. And I loved, you know, good hammer horror. I loved a good American Western, a good American gangster picture, a good war movie, British, French, you know, whatever nation. And I loved, you know, the basic genres and filmmakers who could put a new twist on a genre, you know, the Robert Aldrich, Frankenheimer, you know, so on. They you know, impressed me, and of course, obviously Hitchcock was my god. Wish I could have made anything as good as he ever did. So we are drawn, I think, when we become, when we get careers in our adult years, we're drawn to making the films, or films like the ones that really, you know, took us by storm as young people. And I think that's only natural. And there are some who, you know, I look, the films that Bruce Beresford made were, you know, more intellectually challenging than any of the films that I made, and challenging intrapersonal dramas. And he was drawn to those. And yeah, he did very well with them. So I'm hearing a strange noise.
Don't worry, keep going.
Sorry. Yes. Anyway, so I'm yeah. I would have liked to have made maybe a few serious films, but at a certain point in time, particularly when you change countries, and I saw that, you know, my prospects in Australia in 1990 were, you know, maybe to end up as a, you know, TV series director of, you know, maybe Neighbours, or, you know, nothing wrong with Neighbours. In fact, yeah, I could do a great Neighbours, but, you know, there'd probably be a battle scene, but, you know, I think you have to sort of, you know, recognize that, you know, there are some things that, you know, you're drawn to do, and you do them well, and then eventually, you know, people only think that you can do those things, and they don't really want to take a risk on stretching you. So it is, you know, I suppose that if I could have made a career just doing, you know, well-mounted historical drama, I would have loved that, because, you know, I love history, and I would have liked to have done it as authentically, but also as entertainingly as possible. You know, I would have had a field day with Game of Thrones, obviously, but yeah, but yeah, we'll see. I love every genre known to man, and occasionally you have sort of almost sort of, well, I wouldn't say invented one, but I would say Leprechaun in Vegas and Leprechaun in Space are, you know, are very me. So, I mean, that's an example of absurdist cinema. So I grew up on the, you know, the Monty Python kind of, you know, absurdist humor really appealed to me as a young man, and it reflected the fundamental hypocrisy of all authority. So, you know, it's been fun for me to make a few absurdist cinema pieces like the Leprechaun series, which are ridiculous. So let's have fun with the ridiculous.
Sure.
And there's probably one of mine that I regard as sort of mildly absurdist cinema that you may not have seen, but it's called Megiddo, a Mega Code 2.
No.
Oh, you've got to see that. Yeah. Oh, well, The Omen meets Air Force One in the end of days, and they fight the Battle of the Bulge. So think of it that way. It's an apocalyptic tale of
Sounds great.
The financier always wanted to make. I want to make a film about the Battle of Armageddon. Good, I'm your man. Apparently, well, inevitably, but we did add a couple of little battlefield nukes in one of the battle scenes. But anyway, it's a splendidly absurd allegory and a lot of fun, and both Pentecostal Christians and non-believing secularists get some fun out of it. Anyway, so you'll find it somewhere in some DVD shop, and Michael York as the Antichrist, Franco Nero as his father-in-law, Michael Biehn from the Terminator as God's warrior, lots of good stuff. And R. Lee Ermey, my buddy, now gone to God, as the President of the United States, doing it. I said, he said, well, I'm going to play this as a mixture of Eisenhower and Truman. Well, that'll be an interesting combination, but he gave it a great folksy charm, and as Lee always had great folksy charm, and he is in one of my better films too, The Siege of Firebase, Gloria, which is a war movie that was rare for its day insofar as it gave the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese credit for being the brave soldiers that they were, literally throwing themselves against the superior firepower of the United States forces, and because they were good patriots for their country, and it was a war that should not have happened, as we all know, so anyway, again, sorry, historical digression from me.
But all very interesting. And I also love the way you've spoken about genre. You did a remake of Sahara, and you also did the Happy Face Murders, which I think is such a distinctive film. It's again, really interesting product that you put together.
Yeah, no, Happy Face Murders was a true crime black comedy where everything, well, that Anne Margaret says and does in the film is taken from records of interview and transcripts, court documents. And as we say in the opening titles, the parts in this film that are not true are the least believable. Anyway, but it's I wanted to do the script came along, it was in turnaround, and I said, you can fix it this way by doing bing, 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 and bing, and introducing a wry black comic tone into one of the characters, so she is more fun and less dour and less snappy and grouchy. Let her be grouchy with better level of humor, and the writer really rose to the occasion. And then we got greenlit. We got Anne Margaret, Marg Helkenberger, Henry Thomas, and we had a great cast and shot it in just under 22 days in Toronto, and it got her a nomination for a Golden Globe. She didn't win it, and it was the highest rated Showtime movie in over the previous 12 months. So mission accomplished, and which is important. But I'm glad you singled that one out. It's a police procedural, but is doesn't go in expected directions, and that was great. but Firebase, I'm proud of that as a war movie, and veterans, and I meet them from time to time. There's a Vietnam veteran living, on the next door property. They think it speaks to them. While it's obviously a slight Hollywoodization of their experience, they feel it had essential truths that they understood. We did have, the writers did do a lot of really good research, and again, we had people around us who were veterans as well.
Well done. Now, your last film, I think, was Drive Hard in 2014.
Yes.
Okay. Are you planning any more films?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm attached to what I would call a claustrophobic earthquake picture, which is set in a collapsed elevator shaft that has fallen on its side, and as a result of the earthquake, and it's not a nice place to be, and they have to find their way out. So it's kind of like the Poseidon adventure, in an elevator shaft that's that has fallen virtually onto its side, but is still suffering from aftershocks and power surges and burst water mains, etc., and a group of characters with different agendas, and particularly one person with an agenda, have to find their way out. Will they live? Will they die? And will the person with the moral conflict that we are aware of from his first scene, will he not break bad but break good? And always like stories like that. So that it might happen. I can do it economically because it is a contained earthquake picture, and you only see what the big one did to Los Angeles when you pull back finally from the survivors to, obviously in the Poseidon adventure, to the upturned ship, but in this case to Avenue of the Americas, and a wrecked Los Angeles. Well, a nice cheerful film for Netflix, perhaps. Anyway, the producer's trying. But the fact of the matter is, when you hit 75, even though I'm like to think that I'm fit, at the height of my powers, both creatively and intellectually, and I swim 3-4 times a week, and I clear brush and chop logs and so forth, and I'm perfectly capable of ramrodding a movie through, and I'll sleep later. But the fact is, when you're 75, you are considered to be past your use by date, because it's just, there are lots of great new directors coming up, winning awards and having box office hits, and so it's understandable that from producers, well, who do I choose? Do I choose an old reliable guy, or do I choose someone who's got a bit of heat, and I might bask in the warmth of his heat, if he or she, so I'm committing pronoun crime here, sorry, and then there are great female directors coming up, and I just spoke about one just a little while back, who did a great job in an uncompromising fashion, and I admire her for her work. So the sensible business decision is choose the director with sizzle. However, so when these, as you get older, you depend upon the people who rely on you to create the funding for projects, and as they gradually lose their luster, then it's a game of musical chairs, and eventually there are no chairs left, and they've all gone to other people. But that's okay. That's the law of competition.
Well, Clint Eastwood still got his 90s.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And what I love about him is that he insists upon a quiet set. People are not jabbering behind the scenery, and everything is quiet, and gives the actors the chance to really settle into their parts. So that's one of the things you always hear about Eastwood's movie, and you would not, and what he says goes, and that's great. Anyway, it's possible. I mean, I'd love to do another movie, but right now I'm considered. I write pieces on cinema, and I'm considering writing another book. But I have Alice Through the Multiverse out as my proposed, my novel that should be a streaming series, or at least an anime series. Came close to getting a company interested, but they ultimately passed. There's so many things to choose from. So I'm happy. I decided I will find a place to live where I'm surrounded by trees and have and Bambi comes to the door. So if that's how I have to spend my final years, I'm very lucky.
You are. And I suppose being a member of BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, helps to pass the time as well.
Well, it did while I was in Los Angeles, but now and COVID basically sort of shut down those glorious screenings where all the BAFTA members could get together. So I moved to Oregon, and so I don't go to BAFTA screenings anymore, but it's a very worthwhile institution, and it should go on celebrating excellence in film and television, be it American or British, or Australian. Let's get more Australians getting gongs at BAFTA. That would be nice.
It would be.
But I think Australia's doing very well. It's producing some really great filmmakers who are going on to careers who I hear about them all the time, and so it was a very wise investment that the government made in the Australian film industry. It positioned Australia. It gave Australia a much greater position in the cultural forefront, let's say, of the world, as Australia was getting more and more noticed as not just some a large continent with a small number of people on it in the far end of the world. Australia is very important, in fact, but it's all the actors and cameramen and stuntmen and technicians of all branches of the film industry have gone on to considerable careers outside of Australia and have brought work back to Australia. The Australian film industry, I think, has been a great boon for tourism. And in fact, I cast myself kind of as a minister for tourism when I made BMX Bandits and Man from Hong Kong. I was going to show the beauties of Sydney off to the world, and people might think, oh, I might want to come here, particularly BMX Bandits, which played enormously well across the UK and resonated very well with British audiences. And Frog Dreaming, of course, also. So I think all the Australian films that did reach the international market in every genre helped encourage people to look at Australia with new eyes and look at its sophistication and what it's capable of in the cultural sphere. So while you wouldn't say my films necessarily have added a great deal in the cultural sphere, a few little ideas, but the fact is they resonated with people all over the world, and that's why, you know, Dead End Drive-In, BMX Bandits, Man from Hong Kong, Firebase, Gloria, amongst those, have endured and continue to be, you know, re-released on Blu-ray, and so all this is good.
It is. We must conclude, but I do want to ask you, Brian, how can people get hold of your great book, Adventures in the B-Movie Trade?
Well, I believe that now that Amazon is permitting, you know, Australian books, to be printed on demand in Australia, which they previously didn't. I think this is a problem for Australian authors. If they wanted to self-publish through Amazon, then they had to, you know, do it through Amazon, and then people who wanted in Australia to buy the book had to order it from the United States, which meant the price was doubled, plus you know, that's, you know, the third-party seller's profit margin, plus the shipping, and so it was like $50-$60, and I thought, I'm not worth, you know, $50 or $60, for God's sake. I figured that I'm only worth 20 US, or as it is, $21.99 US dollars is really what I'm worth. And I think it's a good read, a good fast read, and one that you can go back into and reread certain stories and say, what? He said, what? She did what? Etc. And you know, so there are things that you can snack on a number of times, and also, if you really want to sort of study the book, it's from a cinema history point of view, it's a portrait of an era, and an era that is now over. We will not see it again, and COVID basically dealt the coup de grace. The economics were already forming, that the current system of retailing the product through expensive advertising campaigns to theatrical venues where the theater takes 50% of the take, and you have to fund the advertising campaign out of your share, and as a distributor, then you want to get your commission first up as well. So, you know, last cab off the rank are the investors who are going to get a very small return, and you depend upon the ancillary market, DVD, Blu-ray, you know, cable TV, syndicated TV, etc., to provide, you know, a greater share of the revenue. And theoretically, 75% of your revenue will come from those sources, not from theatrical. And that was the way it was working. And it could work on the really big pictures, but it was not a good way of, not a good economic model. And television was more and more, as it became bigger screens, the home cinema experience was developing. And people thought, well, why go to the movies? Why have to pay the babysitter? Why? You know, so there was a whole, you know, economic, you know, factor that was in play, and then COVID struck, and, you know, the streamers basically seized the reins. And when Warner said, and Disney said, right, our streaming service gives you our first run giant movies for a month on our service. So that, you know, that was good for them, and the whole paradigm has changed. Now I hope everyone will go back to cinemas and watch films as a collective and enjoy that buzz of experiencing it as a community, which is you don't at home, not in the same way.
Yeah.
So anyway, look, I still think the future is good. There will always be a need for content. It's how it is marketed, how it is distributed to the consumer that is in the process of changing. And people like me and people like you, who are important enough, you know, because you draw attention to people like me, that our films are worth seeing. So we're all going to be fine as a species, let's say. It's just, the methodology is going to change, but content is king. And so young filmmakers out there, go for it and do better than I did.
Brian, it's been such a pleasure talking to you, and certainly on that positive note, we'll end it there. Brian Trenchard.
Mr. Positive, that's me.
I like it. Brian Trenchard-Smith, thank you so much for talking with me from Oregon, and I certainly recommend everyone listening to this gets hold of Adventures in the B-Movie Trade. It is such a great
I think it's now $36. It's dropped down to $36 in Australia. But the Kindle version plays very nicely on your computer, because in a way I designed the book not only to be a good thumb-turning read, but to be like a photoplay magazine about cinema that plays on your computer screen. And it's, if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free, and I don't get a cent, but never mind. No. I want you to, but that's fine. But no, I think I do get a cent. I think I get a quarter a cent for every page that they turn. And sometimes on my my docket, I see, 400 pages were read by somebody yesterday. Oh, here's a glutton for punishment. Good. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, which I have used, a lot. And I raise a glass to you and to Australia, and I hope to visit again. Whether anybody brings me back, I probably will be coming back sometime next year, when I don't have to stay in a hotel first. So that will be good. Okay. Thank you.
That would be excellent. Brian, thank you again so much, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I've stopped recording. Again, Brian, thank you so much. That was great. I really appreciate it.
I hope so. I hope that wasn't too verbose for you.
Not at all. It's great stories.
Your audience is precisely, enlighten me, who is your regular audience?
Well, I'm on 2 radio stations, so I have a very broad film-based audience in Melbourne, and also I'll be posting this interview on my Movie Metropolis Facebook page as well.
Mm-hmm. So I will outrage critics and people who think I have no business to talk about the Indigenous or politics.
And I would greatly appreciate that, and more outrage the better.
Well, I don't believe in cancel culture either, which seems to be a prevalent thing.
I agree with you,
Anyway.
Brian, I'll let you go.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll now go and cook some halibut.
Okay, and say hello to Bambi.
You needed to know that.
I did need to know that. It was a fishy tale, but I'm glad you told me.
Yes. I have a hungry wife who needs to be fed, and she is aware that I went and found this fresh halibut at the they occasionally do a sort of dump of fish at the local market, so it's relatively fresh. This is good. Anyway, off. Enjoy. Thank you very much, Peter, and I look, hopefully we will talk again sometime in the future. Certainly we'll meet when I next come to Melbourne. It'll probably be Melbourne.
Great. Look forward to it. All the best.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.